I don't understand how it's come to this. I've been expelled from school. I've lost the few friends I had. My own parents won't even look at me now. And it's all because of her. Her. Even now I can't find it in myself to hate her. I love her, despite what she's done to me. I think I always will. For so many years, she's been my reason to get up in the morning. She's been the last thing I think about before I go to bed. Lisa, my soulmate. I was never what you'd call a popular kid. From kindergarten to high school, I was a fat, shy boy who just wanted to learn. I didn't want to cause trouble, and I certainly didn't want to get in any trouble. I mostly floated through life like a dandelion puff on a breeze. In my kindergarten class, she was this lovely creature with soft blonde hair and a face made for smiles. Even as a child, I knew she was beautiful. She found friends easily. Teachers loved her easy smiles and confident ways. Even the boys, who would still think girls were gross for many years, were forced to recognize her attraction. She was the belle of the ball, and our worlds could not have been more different. I was what you would call a fat child. My weight and desire for friendship made me the constant butt of any joke, and I was always the odd man out of any activity. Lisa sat in front of me. Alphabetically, our names are very close, and she became my secret obsession. I would sit behind her and breathe in the scent of her hair and bask in the glow of her beauty as she became my respite in this sea of horror. I would often pretend I was in her group of friends, privy to their secrets and a part of their oh-so-enticing world. I would create conversations and lunch dates and feed my imagination with thoughts of our friendship. Our make-believe friendship was more real to me than my own life, and as the years went on, it became more of an obsession than a daydream. I drew pictures of our time together, wrote poems about her beauty, and filled books with our stories. I didn't have friends, not real friends at least. Lisa was all that I had. The trouble began in high school. Lisa was brilliant, always at the top of our class, but I outshone her most of the time when it came to matters academic. Lisa's one stumbling point was mathematics. She had never found math as easy as, say, English or biology, and it became a megrim for her. I would have offered to tutor her, but the gulf between us had only grown wider as we got older. She was a cheerleader and a member of the student council and the secretary for the glee club. And I was just the fat boy who had grown into an overweight teenager who sat at chess club and debate team and wished I was close to her. When Mr. Sturgis asked us both to stay after class, I never dreamed he would assign me as her tutor. You need help, Lisa, and Reggie is the best math student I have. I think, with Reggie's help, you can pass algebra. I could have kissed him. Lisa agreed, though hesitantly, and that afternoon we met in the library to begin her tutoring session. I could barely pay attention to what I was doing, as this goddess sat beside me and asked me for help on what was really no big deal. I showed her the shortcuts, the workarounds, and the theories that would make it easier for her to succeed. She got a B on her next test, and I couldn't have been prouder. It wasn't long before our study sessions began leaving the library. She met me at the public library a few times. But one day, my greatest dream came true. As I left math class, she handed me a folded piece of paper that said to meet her after cheerleading practice. Then she just flipped her hair and smiled as she strode off on Goddess's legs and said, "See you then." The address was to her house. From then on, we always met at her house in the late afternoon. Her parents were surprisingly accepting of a teenage boy in their home, and I rapidly became as fond of them as I was of Lisa. Her father was an architect, and if I arrived before Lisa, he was always taking me into his study to show me his latest blueprints. Her mother was a lawyer, but after a lengthy lawsuit against the firm she had once been with, she had won enough money to stay at home and look after her family. Working from home as a legal consultant meant she often had time to bake, and her home was always full of the smells of bread or pies or culinary delights. The time I spent in Lisa's house was the best time of my life. As algebra became geometry and calculus, she always came back to her study buddy. I found easier ways to teach her what she needed to know, and she turned out to be a quick study once she found someone to speak her language. As we entered our senior year, I never quite asked why she still refused to acknowledge me in the hallway, or why her friends still picked on me. I was just happy to be with her, be around her, be a part of her world. One night, after helping her through a particularly difficult bit of calculus, she whooped with joy and turned to plant a kiss on my surprised lips. She broke the kiss in less than an instant, but it felt to me as though her lips touched mine for years. I could have floated home that night, and as I settled into bed, I knew what I had to do the next day. I would tell her how I felt, how I'd always felt, and ask her to accompany me to the upcoming spring dance. She liked me. We liked being around each other. What could go wrong? I went to her locker the next morning and found her there with only a single friend. Rebecca Jenner, the friend in question, sneered a little as I approached, and when Lisa turned, I somehow failed to notice the furtive look she kept casting around before she half-heartedly smiled at me. It's only in hindsight that I see my mistake. I approached her as an equal. I approached her in the open. I approached her in her element. I surprised her somewhere that she felt safe. I poured out my heart to her, right then and there, and by the end, a crowd had gathered around us. Some of them were snickering. Some of them were right out mocking me. But the mockery wasn't reserved for me alone this time. Looking back, I could already hear the whispered voices of Lisa's peers as they began formulating the gossip. Oh, Lisa has a thing for pudgy nerds. Looks like Lisa would rather hold hands with pimple-faced dweebs than go out with football players. Sounds like little Lisa had a lot of fun at their study sessions. I didn't care at the time, though. I was pouring my heart out to a girl that I loved, and that was all that mattered. She was crying by the time I was done. Her face was beet red, and her tear-clouded eyes were scanning around for an escape. Finally, she pushed past me, sending me sprawling to the linoleum, and made a break through the crowd. I tried to go after her, but the crowd closed in on me, and the torrent of questions and accusations assaulted me. Where had I been with her? How long before Brad kicked my ass? Was I so stupid to think I was anything but a charity case? On and on and on, until finally I found an outlet and went tearing towards the boys' room. I hid there all through first period, and tried my best to keep my head down for the rest of the day. I didn't see Lisa that day. I didn't see her the next day either. But I heard the rumors about Lisa and her fat little boyfriend, Lisa and her study sessions with me, and all the other rumors about how Brad was looking for me so he could kick my ass up around my ears. Bradley Davies and I didn't have any classes together, luckily for me, but he still managed to find me. He and his friends came across me in the bathroom near the end of the second day and backed me up against the cold wall of the boys' room. He hit me a few times, Brad and Chuck and Gail, and as they took turns hitting me, Brad let me know the score. You stay away from my girlfriend, you hear me? I didn't mind her keeping a little nerdy pet, so long as she still got to cheer and I still got to squeeze into her whenever I wanted to. This comment elicited some laughters and slaps on the back from his friends. But that's over now. She's mine, and I'm not okay with your lost puppy act anymore. I see you around Lisa again, and you're dead, nerd. He punctuated this point by slamming his fist into my cheek, hard enough to knock my glasses into the sink where the lenses shattered against the porcelain. I lay on the bathroom floor and thought this was as low as I could get. How wrong I had been. When I came to school the next day, something had changed. I had been the target of constant teasing the last 2 days, but the reception I got this morning was icy. People whispered behind their hands, their faces angry, and all the anger seemed to be directed towards me. What had I done to deserve such scorn? I was the victim here, right? Brad had beaten the crap out of me, and Lisa had refused to even talk to me for 3 days. What could I possibly have done? The answer came in homeroom. A police officer was waiting to take me to the office, where Lisa's parents, my parents, and the principal were waiting to talk to me. My confusion turned into fear at this, but confusion would make a lot of reappearances that day. The principal invited me to have a seat. My mother was crying, and my father's eyes bored into me like a power drill. I looked to Lisa's parents for some explanation, but they both made it very clear that they wanted nothing to do with me. Lisa had posted a message on Facebook this morning. She told all her friends about how I had forced myself on her during our study sessions and made her do things that I won't even mention here. My depravity knew no limits, and all the while I had convinced her parents that I was a fine young man and a model student. I had convinced everyone of this, she went on, but in reality I was a pervert and a rapist, and when I'd talk to her at school, talk to her like we were equals, she had finally found the strength to speak out about my depravity. She told her parents after that, and they had called my parents and let them know what their little boy had been up to. Someone had called the police then, and that's how we had come to the point we were at now. I won't bore you with the details. My parents and I became the town black spot for the next 3 months, as I took polygraph tests after psychological evaluation and protested my innocence at every turn. The police claimed they had a rape kit that tested positive for something, but the absence of any physical evidence was confronted by my obvious intellect. Why would he be sloppy enough to leave evidence? One officer asked, looking at me as though I was the lowest form of life. The case against me was eventually thrown out due to lack of evidence, but it hardly mattered. I had been accused of rape, and any bright future I might have had slipped out of my grip. It didn't matter how good my grades were, how high my scores were, or how many testimonials I had written by teachers who believed that I was innocent. No college wanted an accused rapist in their school, and I slumped slowly into depression. Why had she done this? Why had she ruined my life? All I had done was love her. All I had done was tell her how I felt, and all she had done was return my love with ruin. That is what brings us here. I'm standing in her bedroom now, looking over my handiwork. I had heard her parents would be out of town, and Lisa was going to have a party. I wasn't invited, of course. Since the incident, I haven't even been back to school, but I seem to remember where the house was and how breakable the back door window was. The rock made a lot of noise as it smashed through the glass, but no one was there to hear it. For rich, intellectual people, her parents certainly have a lot of faith in humanity. I had never seen a security panel or even a surveillance camera on the property, so getting in undetected was easy. I hid in the big walk-in closet that holds all her lovely clothes and waited for her to come home from school. Her door swung open at 4:15, and imagine my surprise as she and Brad fell into her bed in a writhing pile of teenage spirit. Some would have seen this as an obstacle, but to me, it was just another opportunity. His back was to me, and I came up behind him and cut his throat. He garbled out something, but she didn't even seem to notice until he slipped right off her. She turned around and saw me, and that's when the begging started. The begging and the screaming. She kept shouting Brad's name, begging me not to, and I implored her to be as loud as she wanted. I wanted the neighbors to know what was going on. I wanted them to know how Brad had brutally murdered his girlfriend in a fit of teenage aggression before cutting his own throat out. It would be a poetic bit of melodrama, just like Romeo and Juliet. I'm pretty sure I snapped the knife off in her sternum after the 15th or 16th downward stab, but by then, she had stopped screaming. The knife's in my hand now. I was smart enough to wear gloves, and I already had my escape route planned out. You see, I may have never touched her, but that certainly didn't stop me from killing her. I nearly drowned 2 weeks ago, and it changed my life. My family moved out to Mercy Shores recently. It's a little peninsula down in Washington, with 2 hardware stores, a Walmart, and not much else. Mom and Dad grew up in San Diego, amongst the hustle and bustle of city life, and decided they wanted to retire somewhere a little quieter. I had been their last child, a total surprise to both of them at 40. Now that they were 55, they felt it was time to retire and enjoy their golden years. So they moved me 400 miles away from my friends, my school, and anyone I had ever known so they could enjoy those golden years. We moved into a beach house of sorts. It was a 2-story, the second floor a loft that overlooked the ocean out of a big round bay window. They gave me the loft and took a larger room downstairs with a less spectacular view, knowing I was not happy about leaving my friends behind. I guess my parents were trying to placate me, so I set up my meager possessions that I had brought with us, the moving truck being a couple of days behind. As I set about finding a home for things, I found myself drawn to the big bay window that overlooked our little stretch of beach. The shore was far from picturesque. Not quite as pretty as the California beaches, Mercy Shore was stony and a little bleak looking. I didn't doubt the water would be cold and clear, but it would also likely have rocks, and maybe crabs scuttling underfoot. There was a tall jut of rock just off the coast, about 50 feet from the shore. I found my gaze drawn there again and again. It looked like nothing so much as a tall throne, fit for a giant. The seat was smooth from many tides. I almost thought I could see a little hollow in the back of the throne. The throne wasn't quite large enough for caves, but there was a narrow fluted passage in the throne's back that would likely fill with water when the waves crushed over it. Those waves woke me up that first night. The crashing of the breakers jarred me awake. I realized that they were so loud because I'd left the window open. As I slid it shut, my eyes were caught by the moon as it cast its glow on the stone throne. As I closed the window, I saw something moving in the water. The lean shape crested up and out of the water like a sea serpent, and as it came up, I could see it was a girl. Her hair was long and silvery and lovely. She ran her fingers through it as I stared at her, and she seemed to feel my gaze as she floated like a specter in the dark water. She looked up at me, her smile wide and inviting, and waved a single pale hand at my window. I waved back, and when she slipped under the water this time, she didn't come back up. When I woke up the next morning, I convinced myself it had been a dream. The next day, Mom and Dad wanted to go antiquing in town. I told them I didn't want to go, and they didn't act too put out by my refusal. It was pretty clear they didn't want a complaining teen tagging along and ruining their trip. I waved to them from the front porch as they left before moving upstairs to relax a little. I sat in the window seat of my new room, reading and watching the waves crash, when I saw some people walking down with blankets and coolers. They started setting up their stuff, and I noticed most of them looked around my age. On a whim, I decided to talk to them. What was the worst that could happen? I slipped on a pair of comfy shorts and headed out. The beachgoers tensed when they saw the door open, but they relaxed a little when they realized I wasn't an adult. I introduced myself and learned that they were Matt, Stuart, Kyle, and Roger. They had apparently been coming to this beach for quite a while and said it was a favorite hangout spot for them. Sorry for intruding. Throne Beach has been empty for years, and the old lady who used to live here always let us play here when we were kids, Matt explained. Matt looked like he'd be at home on any California beach. Board shorts, long brown hair cut in that way that's half bowl cut and half natural, a surfboard next to his blanket, and a smile for anyone. Stuart was tall, gangly almost, with buck teeth and thick glasses. He was very pale, and I got the impression that they had dragged him out from under a rock to hang out with his friends. Kyle and Roger looked like a couple of classic Chads. Snap brim hats, sculpted physiques, gold chains, board shorts, the works. They slapped my hand when I went to shake theirs and roared with laughter when I looked a little confused. We became friends in that effortless way teens often do. I hung out with them for the rest of the day. We swam, the water was cold and stony, as I had thought it would be, and played frisbee with a big red disc that Roger had brought. I invited them in for lunch, and we sat on the blankets and munched cold sandwiches and chips. The sun was starting to work its way across the sky as we ate. I noticed that mine wasn't the only eye drawn to the big rock out there. Matt was studying it intently as he ate, and it almost seemed like he was looking for something out there. "It's pretty cool," I said, taking a bite of bologna as he looked over at me. "The rock, I mean." Matt nodded. "Oh, Matt just thinks it's cool because he thought he saw a girl out there," Roger crowed. Matt shot him a murderous look, but I was interested. "A girl?" Matt blew out a big long breath. "Well, it happened a few years ago. I was out here swimming with Kyle and Roger, and the waves were a little rougher than I thought they were. We had all been daring each other to swim out to the rock and back. We had all done it since we were young. I was on my way back, and a huge wave crashed over me and drove me under. I kicked my legs and tried to right myself, but the waves kept crashing down. I was underwater, running out of air, and as my lungs cried out, I felt hands catch me. Someone lifted me and swam me to the shore. I was on my knees, hacking up water and struggling for breath. I looked back at the water and saw a girl swimming away. Kyle and Roger came running up then, and when I looked back, she was gone. Kyle snickered, but I was curious. What did she look like? She had long hair, maybe blonde or silver. She looked young. I remember thinking that she was about my age. Her hands felt strong but cold, and I've been keeping an eye out for her ever since. I keep hoping maybe she'll come back. His eyes glazed over a little then, and he stared back at the throne-shaped rock, hopefully. I heard my dad honk the horn on his old truck then, and my new friends turned to see my parents coming up the drive. They had some furniture in the back of the pickup. As Dad got out, he called me over to help him move it. I said my goodbyes and went to help, but found all four of them following behind me to my surprise. We had the furniture inside faster than expected between the five of us, and I introduced them to my parents. Mom asked if they'd like to stay for dinner, holding up a takeout Chinese food bag. I can get some more. The place next to the antique shop smelled so good that I just had to have some. Maybe another time, ma'am. We don't want to intrude, Matt said. He held his hands up, and I slapped it as he promised that they would see me tomorrow and see if I wanted to hang out. They cleaned up their stuff, and after another round of goodbyes, they hopped on their bikes and rolled into town. Mom smiled. Making friends already, I see. I smiled back, realizing I had done just that. We sat around the table and ate as they told me about their day. My parents talked about the antiquing. The stores in town had a large selection, and Mom was in love with several other pieces. I told them about my new friends, and they agreed that they seemed like nice boys. I told them how lovely the beach was, and Mom said she had gotten a call from the movers saying that they would be here tomorrow afternoon with the stuff. Maybe your friends would like to help you set up your room, she asked. Turned out, they did. I spent that summer hanging out with my new friends. We had moved at the very end of school, and next year I would be starting 10th grade at Mercy Shores High. Matt, Stuart, Kyle, and Roger would be starting 10th grade as well. We had many of the same classes, and as the summer slipped away, Matt proposed one last beach day to celebrate the end of summer. It's the last really warm day before fall, and we should take advantage of it. It was a great day. The sun was hot, the wind was breezy. Dad had set up a grill and was cooking hot dogs and hamburgers. Mom had found the badminton set, and we were using it to play volleyball. Mom agreed to play with us, to round the teams out, and she turned out to be really good at it. Roger, Stuart, and my mom creamed Kyle, Matt, and I 3-5, and we decided to swim a little after that. We took to the water like a school of fish, and Kyle suggested we swim to the rock. Come on, Kyle, let's not, Matt protested. What's the matter, Matt? You chicken? Kyle teased. I'll race you, I said, starting to swim for the rock as Kyle cawed angrily and lit out after me. You don't realize it from the shore, but the rock is pretty far out. It was about 30 feet from the beach, and you just don't really realize it till you're there. I had swum to the rock before, we all had, but it's never the same trip twice. I swam hard, tearing up the surf as I went, and when I got to the rock, my arms were burning. I hung to the side of the rock like a barnacle, catching my breath as Kyle closed the distance. When he was about 3 feet away, I dove back into the water and started swimming hard for the shore. I heard him yell, but I ignored him, paddling hard as I made for my friends who were bobbing near the beach. That was when something grabbed my leg. At first, I thought it was a fish that had just wandered too close, and I kicked my foot out to shoo it. When it wrapped its squishy hands around my leg again, though, it tugged me down with a strength I hadn't felt before. I was pulled under the water, dragged beneath the waves, and as I went below, I felt the air rush out of me in surprise. I kicked out, but whatever had me was fast. It dodged out of the way of my kicks and continued to drag me into the blackness below. I opened my eyes, trying to see what it was, and I was transfixed for a moment. It was a girl. It was the girl. Her hair plumed around her like a halo, and as she noticed me noticing her, she smiled at me. For a moment, it seemed like her mouth was too full of teeth, rows of needles that gleamed in the murky depths. She tugged me down, but now I very much did not want to go. I kicked again, but I was losing focus. I needed air. I was losing consciousness. As the blackness swam up before my eyes, I thought for sure I was going to drown. Then, something grabbed me under my arms and tugged me free. The next thing I was aware of was someone giving me CPR as I coughed and gurgled on the beach. Mom's face swam before me, and she smiled in relief as I came back. I sat up, still coughing, and heard someone in the water yelling for Matt. Kyle was beside me, apologizing profusely as I choked out the last of the water. I looked around and saw that Stuart was yelling at Matt as he dived under again and again, searching for something. I coughed up some water. What's wrong with Matt? Kyle looked out and sighed. He went out to save you. He dove to get you, but he came up talking about a girl he'd seen. He said she had you by the leg, and after he put you on the beach, he went out to find her again. Dad called the festivities shortly after that. Kyle and Roger hauled Matt out of the water, and the four left after saying goodbye and telling me that they were glad I was okay. Matt didn't say much of anything. He looked dazed and confused, and kept looking back at the water as they led him back to the bikes. I knew how he felt. I found myself drawn to the water after that. If I had a spare moment, or even if I didn't, I would sit by the water and listen to the waves. I couldn't get her out of my head, that beautiful creature that had grabbed me. Why had she grabbed me, I wondered. She had seemed intent on showing me something underwater. Did she want me to see something, maybe? Matt started coming around a lot more. Not to see me, not really, but I think he wanted to be close to the water too. I caught him down by the water at night sometimes, sitting by the shore or sitting by the beach. He never brought anything. It was always just sitting in the sand and staring at the water. Dad came out and shooed him more than once, and he told me to tell Matt not to sit out there at night a few days later. He could get hurt out there, and I don't want to call the cops on him for trespassing. That was the night I heard the whispery voice coming from the beach. It came through my window and seduced my ears to wakefulness. I sat up, listening, hearing a returning voice that was much less musical. It was no less familiar, though. When I looked out on the beach, I saw that Matt was on the shore and talking with someone. The someone was in the water, and by the sound of it, they were trying to coax him into the water with them. He looked back towards the road, his bike a shadowy hulk on the street, and then again at the speaker. He said something too low for me to hear, and when they returned to that sweet honey sound, he walked into the water, and I heard him splashing as he dove. I ran from my room and went softly down the stairs. I was worried about him. He was a strong swimmer, but the waters at night were likely dangerous. I came out onto the beach, whispering his name so as not to wake my folks up. I went to the edge of the water and scanned the dark ocean for him, but he was nowhere to be found. He had been there only a moment before, hadn't he? I spent a few minutes searching for him before finally heading inside, thinking maybe I'd been dreaming or something. That was when I heard the voice. "Hello, handsome." I turned back to the water. I'd heard a feminine voice speak, heard it plain as day, but all I could see was the black waves as they churned endlessly. It was dark out there, too dark, and I didn't think that anything could exist out there in that blackness. "Not leaving already, are you?" the voice asked again. It was closer now, and when I looked, I saw a silver-haired girl sitting on the shoreline. It was the same one as before. She was dressed in a green dress, the color of seaweed. Her hair was long and silver and hung wild around her, shimmering wetly in the moonlight. Her skin was like porcelain, so white and flawless, and her face looked like a carved mask made of flesh. Her hands were on her knees, and when she turned, she smiled at me with the most beautiful set of perfect white teeth. She was breathtaking, the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen, and as she tugged at my legs, trying to get me to sit, I did. "What brings you here so late?" she asked in her whispery voice. I thought my friend was here." "No one here but me and you." Her silvery hair danced in the moonlight as she shook her head. "I saw you the first night I moved in here," I said, not knowing why. She nodded. "I wanted to say hello, and now it seems I have." I don't know how long I sat there, but it was the best night of my life. We talked for hours about nothing at all. She absorbed every word I said, and I basked in her ephemeral beauty. She was a goddess, her skin lacking blemishes or faults, her hair a perfect sheet of silver. We talked until the sun came up, and I remember her looking at it and giving it a little hiss. "Come see me tonight, handsome," she said sweetly. "Wait, where are you going?" "Home. "I'll be back tonight." Then she kissed me, and my whole world trembled on the edge of breaking as her lips pressed against mine. When I came back to myself, I was lying on the beach. Matt's parents showed up the next day around lunch. Matt had apparently been missing since last night. They were worried about him because he hadn't been acting like himself lately. He hadn't been eating well, his sleep had been fitful, and they had often woken up to find him gone at night. Matt's father had found him on our beach many times, curled up in the sand, and they had hoped they'd find him here today. My parents said they hadn't seen him, and I said the same. It wasn't a lie. I hadn't seen him after all. I'd seen the girl, the most beautiful moonchild, but any thoughts of my friend had fled my mind after that. They left to see the sheriff, and Mom bemoaned the luck. She asked if I was sure I hadn't seen him last night, and I said that I hadn't. After lunch, I went up and took a nap. I wanted to be fresh for her tonight. I met with her every night that week. I came up after sundown to find her sprawling on the beach waiting for me. We talked for hours, locked in each other's eyes. Her face was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, and she seemed to hang on my every word. Thinking back, I don't think she spoke much at all. She wanted to hear about my life, my friends, my hobbies, books I'd read, and anything else that mattered to me. She always left at sunrise, kissing me and leaving me dazed and confused. In town, Matt's disappearance was big news. The sheriff had talked to us a few times, wondering if any of us had seen him. The state police were searching everywhere. Every friend he'd ever had, anyone who could have any contact with him, and every place he might have been was searched and searched again. Knowing him to be a swimmer, they were scuba divers combing the ocean, but their hopes were low of finding him if he'd gone into the water. I was in a daze. My waking thoughts were of the girl, the lovely girl, and when I would see her again. Kyle tried to get me to come looking for Matt with them, but I was always too tired. Mom wanted to take me school shopping, but school just didn't interest me. I was in love, I was in lust, and I wanted nothing but my porcelain goddess forever. My haze held until one day when they found Matt. Kyle came slamming into my room, rousing me from sleep and saying we had to go. "What? Kyle, it's too early. I want to sleep." "It's 12:30, dude. Get up and come with me, now." He threw clothes at me as I groggily got out of bed. "What's your damage, man? Why the sudden rush?" "We found him." My blood ran cold. "You found Matt?" "What's left of him. Stewart's got the sheriff, and Roger's staying with the body. I need you to come say your goodbyes before the media circus hits. If you even want to say goodbye." I put my shirt on, glaring at him owlishly. "What's that supposed to mean?" Kyle glared at me. "You're acting just like him before he disappeared. You don't want to hang out. You don't even want to help us look for him. So I'm assuming that you already knew he was missing." "I don't like what you're insinuating," I said, starting to get angry. "You seemed like a good guy when you first moved to town, but now I'm not so sure. You know something. Maybe not all of it, but you know something. Now either come with me or don't, but either way, it's the last time you're ever going to see him. It's also the last time I want to see you." I got dressed and followed him. Matt, it turned out, had washed up on the beach about 5 miles from my house. Well, what was left of him had washed up. His arms and legs were picked over stumps. His eyes and nose were gone, ditto for his lips and ears. If he hadn't still been wearing the t-shirt that Roger had given him for his birthday a year before, no one would have known it was him. He was a torso, picked over from head to toe. When we got there, Stewart and Roger were nearby, both of them crying. The sheriff had shunted the two boys away, and as we approached, he raised a hand to stop us. "No closer, boys. I appreciate you finding the body, but I need you to stand back." Kyle told the sheriff how they had found the body while riding along the road. "We were going to the corner store when we saw him. We thought he was a dolphin that had been washed up until we saw the t-shirt. That's when we came to get you. The ambulance came and took the body away. I remember looking at him under that white sheet and still being able to see his eyeless face. I realized I'd been living in a cloud the whole time. I needed to find out what had happened that night, and only one person knew for sure. After dark, I went to find her. She lay waiting for me, the same as always, but when I didn't sit, she seemed worried. "What's wrong, handsome? You seem upset." I took a deep breath. "What happened to Matt the night we met?" "Who?" she asked, but her voice didn't seem right. "My friend, Matt." I think you'd been talking to him just like this before he died. I think he went into the water after you that night, and now his body is sitting in the morgue, half eaten. I took a step back from her. Handsome, I don't know who this person is. Why don't you come sit with me? You can tell me all about them. She patted the sand, and for a moment I saw a hand the color of algae. I saw a hand with webbed fingers. She must have noticed, because the hand was normal again just that fast. I took another step back. Why did you save him all those years ago? Why did you save him from drowning if you were just going to kill him? She looked down, her hair making a sheet in front of her face. He wasn't ready yet. That sent a shiver through me. Ready? Ready for what? When she looked back up, her face had changed. Her eyes were like onyx stones. Her nose had become a snake's slit. Her teeth were rows of sewing needles, and her grin looked ready to split her full rotten lips. The dress wasn't a dress. It was her shimmering scales, and as she moved, I could see a tail like a carp's attached to her. Her whispery voice was now like a hook dragged across a rock. We needed his seed. Our men are gone. There's no one to hunt for us. We must make some more. We have to create the next generation. My feet were moving backwards now. You killed him for his... We needed his seed. We needed his meat. Once we were done, we gave him back, she said, her teeth fixed in a lazy grin. I don't want to see you anymore, I said. You're not the person I thought you were. I was 12 feet away, but I heard her final words on the subject. You can't turn from me, boy. I swim in your veins now. You can't deny me any more than he could. She was right. Even as I walked away, wanting to run, I felt my feet trying to go back to her. I had to make myself go inside. I had to make myself go into my room. I had to make myself close the curtains and try to resist the urge to go back to the beach. Writing this helped, but I can't stop thinking about her, even with my mind so distracted. She's never a monster in my memories. When I think of her, she's always the porcelain moonchild I met on the beach. She's always the sweet girl whose lips were sweeter still. She's always the subject of my infatuation. I peeked out my window several times. She's out on the rock, sitting on the throne, singing to me. Her song is for me alone, and I know that I will go to her despite my best efforts. Even now, I feel like a swim. Even now, I feel myself wanting to swim to her. Even now, I feel myself wanting to see what she has to show me in the deeps. When I stepped into the little room, I thought I had come to the wrong place. I have AOADD, Adult Onset Attention Deficit Disorder. If that sounds made up, it's because it's pretty rare, from what I understand. Most people get ADD when they're kids, but very few of them are diagnosed once they're my age. In fact, it's something like 1% of people, from what I understand. When I was a kid, I was never prone to any of the hyperactivity or attention problems that my peers had. I never needed medication or structure to help me pay attention while I was in class. I did really well in school and did really well in my working life, right up until I was about 34. Then suddenly, I had the hardest time paying attention. I couldn't focus on much of anything, not even for the short term. I would find my mind wandering while I was at work, and eventually, I got fired. I couldn't concentrate long enough on my work to get anything done. I tried to find another job, but anything I managed to get ended the same way. I couldn't even pay attention long enough to flip hamburgers, and my resume was soon in shambles. At home, I struggled to relate to my family. Television shows, sporting events, the day-to-day things no longer held my attention. I was aware of this, aware that I was losing my wife and kids, but I couldn't pay attention to that either. It was like being trapped just behind your eyes and having to watch as you lose everything. After my wife left and took the kids, I decided it might be time to go see a doctor. This was a little different than just the general malaise that I sometimes found with life, and I needed help. My doctor told me about the adult onset attention deficit disorder, and prescribed medication and some supplements. He helped me fill out the paperwork and get on disability. The disability paid for my housing. My wife had taken our house in the divorce, and the disability made them go easy on me when it came to child support. I wasn't just a lazy slob, I had a medical condition, and I was trying to overcome it. None of the medication worked, the supplements either, and nothing they suggested seemed to help with my attention problems. After a while, my doctor recommended a support group, and I told him I'd give it a try. When I came to my first session, I wasn't sure that I had made the right call. The meeting room was covered with pictures of a man, hand drawings, and police sketches, all of them with the caption, "Have you seen this man?" I wondered who he was, the whole thing feeling a bit tinfoil hattish, but I had to admit that the man looked a little familiar. I was still staring at him when the organizer called me out, looking up when the man asked if I had AOADD. When I told him I did, he nodded and told me I was in the right place. So I took a seat with the other 5 or 6 people there and decided to give it a try. "So, why don't you tell us about your trigger moment?" "My what?" I asked, not sure what he was talking about. "Your trigger moment. Everyone in the group has one. It's the moment you realize that you had a problem with attention. It'll sound a little weird, but it may surprise you to learn that a lot of our trigger moments are very similar." I thought about it, really racking my brain, but I couldn't come up with much of anything. My doctor had never said anything about a trigger moment, and this was something new. My attention issues had just kind of happened, and I couldn't think of anything that had caused it. The man leading the meetings, a middle-aged guy with salt and pepper hair, nodded and said that was normal. "Charlie," he said, looking at a bearded guy who was dressed like somebody's dad at an amusement park, "why don't you talk about your trigger moment? Maybe it'll help him figure it out." Charlie nodded, interlocking his fingers as he put them across his lap. "I was walking down Main Street when a man suddenly called out to me from a nearby park bench. He asked if I would mind giving him my attention, just like that, and I nodded, saying I would. I figured he just wanted money. Most of the guys that call out to you from park benches want money. But after I agreed to give him my attention, he nodded and just got up and walked away. I thought it was weird, wondered what the hell that had been about, but as I walked, I realized I couldn't focus on the fantasy football team I had been planning. I'd been thinking about the game coming up. I was really big into fantasy football back then, and the team I had put together was doing really well. I had been going over my roster for next week. My team was about to go into the semifinals, and it was weird to realize that the roster would no longer hold my attention. I just kind of wandered around, not really thinking about anything in particular. That's how it started. After that, I couldn't really pay attention to anything. I lost my job, I lost my girlfriend, and now I just kind of float around most of the time. That trigger moment, the moment in time when I met the man, seems to be the only thing I can really concentrate on anymore. I can remember it with crystal clarity, but everything else is like catching water in a sieve. I can think about something for a moment or two, maybe even for as long as a half an hour, but eventually, it's gone. I live out of a van now. You might have seen it when you pulled up to the rec center, and I only have it because the guy took my money and handed me the keys, and I didn't have to sign anything. It's not registered. The cops have ticketed me 12 times or more, and it's only a matter of time before they take that too, I guess. The group nodded at him like this was the most normal thing they had ever heard, and when they all looked at me expectantly, as if I had my own story to tell, I just shook my head. There was something, though, a tickling in the back of my mind, but nothing yet. "Melissa, why don't you go next?" He never asked a question, never asked people if they wanted to share, and all of his statements were just that. He wasn't asking them if they wanted to put their story out there. He was telling them that it was time to share information. I was working as a waitress at a lunch counter. It was the middle of the day, the lunch rush was in full swing, and I barely even looked at the guy when he came and sat down at the counter. I walked over and asked if I could get him something. He said all he wanted was my attention, just a little attention. When I said he had it, he just got up and walked away. I thought it was weird. The guy had wanted my attention and then he left, but that was how it started. I'm not quite as bad as some of the people in the group. I can still hold on to my attention for about 40% of the time. Sometimes, however, I'll just lose all ability to pay attention to anything. My doctor recommended this group, thinking it might stop it from getting worse, but I think it's as bad as it'll ever get. After all, the man only asked for a little of my attention, not all of it. I stopped her after that, asking if she was serious. She said she was, and I looked at the group organizer with a raised eyebrow. Are you trying to tell me that these two had their attention stolen by, what, some kind of demon or something? The organizer shook his head emphatically. No, not a demon. I don't believe in heaven or hell, but I do believe in this man and what he's doing. I don't know what he is, some highly persuasive psychic, some kind of creature from outside our reality, or just some Orwellian thought criminal who's figured out how to perpetrate the worst crime imaginable. But he is the string that holds everyone together, and he seems to like this area the best. I got up, meaning to leave, but the organizer stopped me with a few words. You met him too, didn't you? I had my hand on the door, but his statement had made me think again about where I had seen the man on the poster. I saw you recognizing him when you came in. Everyone does, but they don't always remember right away. He's sneaky, a very easy-to-miss man. He's so unassuming that you never think twice about giving him your attention. It's just a turn of phrase, after all. May I have your attention, please? But he means it literally. They never realize what they're giving up when they agree to give him their attention, but he knows full well what he's taking. I was still at the door, my hand around the knob. Even though I didn't believe what he was saying, I couldn't deny one thing. I did recognize the man in the picture. I just couldn't remember where. Larry, why don't you tell your story next? You should have a seat and listen. Larry has a real harrowing tale. I took my seat, curiosity getting the better of me, and looked at Larry as he looked at his cheap Walmart shoes instead of the group. Larry reminded me of the dad from The Honeymooners, an older guy in the comfortable overweight of age. His head was bald, except for a scattering of peach fuzz on top, and I noticed there was a long scar on his left arm that he kept covered with the sleeve of his shirt. There was enough sleeve to do the job. He was wearing a sweatshirt even in the unseasonable heat, but he seemed inadvertently to pluck at it. It was as if the scar itched him, and he needed to scratch it. I was a bus driver for the city. I've been a bus driver for 25 years. I knew my job, I knew my route, and if I'd been a little luckier, I was only about 5 years away from a really good retirement. I was taking on afternoon fares, greeting people as they put in their change and coins in the little slot. When he got on, I told him it was $1.50 to ride the bus, and it was change only. He asked me something, and at the time, I thought he had asked if I had a quarter. Sometimes they didn't have enough, and they asked if they could borrow a quarter or a dime. I told him sure, digging around in my pockets to see if I had some change. But when I looked up with a couple of dimes, the guy was gone. I didn't think anything of it, just slapped the change in the box and got on my way. As I drove, however, I found my attention waning. I couldn't really focus on any one particular thing. I was just looking everywhere, having trouble remembering what I'd been doing. I crashed that bus into rush hour traffic, causing one of the biggest accidents in the city's memory at the time. There were no fatalities, thankfully, but there was enough property damage and medical expenses that the city had little choice but to fire me. I got a portion of my retirement, but nowhere near what I would have got after retiring with the full 30. I feel terrible for what I did, but even that seems to be dulled by the fact that I can't seem to pay attention to anything for more than a few minutes. I have to write down these meetings on a whiteboard so I can even remember that I have to go to them at all. If it wasn't for Kay here, calling us on meeting days and coming to pick us up, most of us wouldn't be here at all. Kay, the organizer, looked back at me and seemed to be inviting me to tell my own story. I still couldn't remember all the details, but something was starting to come back as I listened to them tell their stories. I had been going to get coffee for my boss and some of my friends in the office. They had given me their order, and I had gone to Keeger Coffee to get some Joe. I had been coming back with the cardboard container of coffee, the one for me, balanced in my other hand, when someone had asked if they could have my attention, please. I turned, looking at the guy as he stood on a box with a small crowd gathered around him. It wasn't many, maybe 5 or 6 people, including me, but as he asked the question again, a few of them nodded. I found myself nodding along with them. Kay was right. The question was so harmless that I hadn't thought twice about agreeing to it. It seemed that even a nod was good enough. After 3 or 4 of the people had nodded and stepped in closer, he clapped his hands and stepped down off the box. Then, to the general confusion of the crowd, he simply walked away. Looking at the group again, I realized that one of the people from the crowd was sitting there, and they seemed to have remembered me as well. He was on a street corner, a guy standing on a soapbox. He called for everyone's attention, and a few of us gave it to him. I walked off after he left, not thinking anything of it, but that was when it all started. The guy I'd recognized from the crowd was nodding along, looking around as if to show people that he wasn't crazy. Kay was nodding too, and when he spread his hands out, everyone grasped hands, and I found myself joining them. Kay clearly was no victim of the man, and I wondered what his connection was to all this as he reaffirmed to all of us that we were okay, and that it was going to get better. I'm glad that you remembered the man and the moment you lost your attention to him. When I started this group 3 years ago, with Larry there, I knew there would be others. I want to help, I want to heal, and I want to be here for all of you in your time of need. There were nods, some of them thanking him, but I was still curious as to why. Why? If he hasn't affected you, then why do you care? I said, as all of them looked at me. Kay nodded, having expected this. Though I still have my attention, I can assure you that I too have been affected by this man. My father lost his attention to him. You see, about 25 years ago, when I was just a freshman in high school, my father accidentally gave his attention to this man as he stood at a bus stop a few blocks from here. He told anyone who would listen about the man, who had only asked for his attention, screamed it from his bed in the mental hospital, but no one believed him. No one besides me, that is. I've been looking for evidence for years, something to justify my father's stories. And the more of you that I find, the more evidence I get of the man and his existence. I'm so proud of you, of all of you, for being brave enough to come here today and share your stories. They all started to clap, but I didn't join in. So what do we do now? I asked as the applause died down. Kay cocked a head at me. What do you mean? I mean, if we know this man is stealing our attention, then why don't we find him and get it back? The others shook their heads, and I realized I probably wasn't the first person to think of that. Kay sat back, shaking his head morosely, and told me to put the idea out of my mind. But why? We can find him. You said he likes to hunt in this area, so why don't we just go after him? Because no one who tries ever finds him, or they never come back. They either fail to find him and go crazy trying to get back what they lost, or they find him and he does something to them. Maybe having their attention gives him some kind of power over them. Maybe he just does something worse to them. No one knows. This group is a safe place, a support group for those who are suffering from what he did to them. I never wanted to see anyone else live the way my father did, strapped to a hospital bed so he wouldn't wander off and hurt himself. I help people who have been hurt by the man, helping them lead a normal life. Well, as normal a life as they can. I feel that it's my sacred duty to help people, to try and get something back after what he's taken from them. But there's no getting back what he's taken. I hope you'll join us in that. There is, after all, safety in numbers. The meeting ended shortly thereafter, and as I said my goodbyes and watched Kay pack up the snacks, I covertly took one of the photos off the wall. I know he said that once I remembered, the memory would be crystal clear, but I didn't want to risk forgetting what this guy looked like. I can't share in Kay's optimism, and I can't stand by and do nothing if this man is the one who has affected my life in such a way. I don't care what the consequences are. I don't care what happens to me. I'll tattoo it on the back of my hand if I have to, so I can force myself to concentrate anytime I begin to slip. I will find this man, the strange creature who steals what is most important to us, and I will have my attention back, or die trying. She was the perfect woman. I have no idea how I managed to catch her attention. Our relationship, our marriage, it was all perfect, except for one thing that neither of us could have foreseen. We met in college. She was working towards her English degree, and I was studying business. My major required me to take an English course, as did hers, and when she asked if the desk next to mine was taken, I was almost too stunned to answer. Kathy was beautiful in that artless way that some women have, and she smiled as I fumbled over my answer. That would have been the end of it for most people. I had fumbled my one chance, but Kathy wasn't like other women. She told me later that she had found it endearing, and she suspected that she was already a little bit taken with me when she sat down. When I saw you from across the room, I just knew that I wanted to get to know you better. We talked a little bit before class, comparing schedules and going over the usual getting-to-know-you chit-chat. When the teacher arrived and class began, I found myself snatching little glances at her as she bent over her notebook. She caught me looking once, and to my surprise, I saw her smile at me. I was smitten after that smile, and when Kathy invited me to have lunch with her after class, I didn't even have to think about it. We were dating a week later, and as we got closer, should have noticed the warning signs of problems to come. I suppose I understand how it escaped my notice, though. Few people would have considered utter peace and pure relaxation a problem. When we walked hand in hand, I would get this feeling of utter peace throughout my body. When we kissed, I felt like nothing in the world could hurt me. She made me feel safe, made my problems melt away, and I knew I wanted more than the few hours a day we got to share with each other. Her college schedule made it difficult to go out more than twice a week, and my own class load kept me busy too. Part of the reason we had such little time together, though, was Kathy's commute to and from school. Kathy lived an hour and a half from campus, and couldn't begin to afford an apartment on her meager student income. The job I worked, plus the leftover grant money I had, paid the rent on my studio apartment, but not much else. Another person paying rent was nice, but I couldn't say that was the only reason that I offered to let her live with me. I also wanted her close to me. She made me feel good, made me feel safe. Being in her presence made the dark world in which I lived more tolerable, and I wanted that for more than a few hours a week. I offered to let her move in, and after a week of mulling it over, she agreed. That weekend, we combined our meager possessions, and I slept like a baby in her arms that night. As we began to spend our evenings together, the problems became more apparent. Problems is a terrible word for it, because in the beginning, it was more like a godsend. When we sat on the couch, our hands linked, I would find myself getting drowsy. When we would cuddle on the couch, our bodies pressed together, I would lose minutes at a time, and my eyes would grow heavier and heavier. The feeling of peace I found in her presence put me at ease, and that ease led to some of the best sleep of my life. I would sleep more deeply than I ever had before, and wake up after 8 hours refreshed and ready to start my day. Kathy seemed pleased with the attention. She'd only been with one other person before we started dating, but I could tell that she wondered why I hadn't slept with her yet. Some women's feelings would have been hurt by this, but Kathy had been raised in a very religious household, and must have assumed that I was simply waiting till marriage. The truth was that, while I would have loved to have slept with her, the sleeping was the problem. Whenever we got close, my arms around her and our bodies pressed together, I would find myself blinking and suddenly losing long periods of time. Sometimes she would lead me to bed, sometimes she would just sleep with me on the couch, but I would always wake up next to Kathy with a deep feeling of fulfillment. I had assumed that she was feeling the same way. I often thought that maybe this was the feeling that we gave each other, and it made me feel good to bring her the same sort of peace that she brought me. This went on for about 6 months, and I thought that things were going well. We went out to dinner, we had friends over, we went on dates, and seemed to be living together with few problems. I had been tentatively looking at rings, preparing to pop the question and make it official. Besides the matter of intercourse, I thought we were happy. Then one evening I came home from class to find her crying on the couch. I hadn't seen her that day. She'd been absent from the one class we had together, and when I'd called her, she said she was feeling sick. It was nothing serious. She maybe had a cold or something. I'd told her to feel better, hanging up so that I could get to my next class. But as I saw her looking up from her cupped hands, I knew something was definitely wrong. I had never seen her cry before, and it was so alarming that I could do little else but go to her and wrap my arms around her. She wouldn't tell me what was wrong, but I wish now that I had pressed her. I wrapped her in my reassuring arms and tried my best to comfort her in her time of need. My reassuring arms quickly turned into drawing her close and wiping her tears away. This soon led to kissing, which led to touching, and then to the bedroom. I won't bore you with the details, but I think you know how it ended up. I woke up the next day, her hands lightly stroking my hair, and fresh tears running down her cheeks. It was our first time, and I couldn't even remember how it had gone. When I asked her to marry me a month later, she seemed overjoyed. We had been living together for half a year now, and our love for one another was pretty clear. She wore my engagement ring with pride, showing it off to her friends, and we began to plan our wedding. I was too blind to see that she was making appointments with a campus therapist more often than she used to. I was too comfortable to notice the tears that sometimes came to her while we lay in bed together. I was too wrapped up in my own feelings to notice the prescriptions that appeared in the medicine cabinet. I was just so comfortable that I never wanted it to end. It's easy to get tunnel vision when you're spending all your time in the tunnel of love, I suppose. After that first time, however, I did make efforts to be better in the bedroom. Kathy was patient with me, seeing that I was trying, but I often found myself trying one moment and waking up the next. She was always quick to reassure me that it was nothing to be ashamed about, but I knew it hurt her deeply to have a partner incapable of being intimate with her. So, I set out to find the reason for my sleeping fits. And so, I began to make doctor's appointments of my own. I said that the appointments were for her benefit, but I was honestly more concerned that I might have a real problem brewing. The last thing I wanted to discover at 22 was that I was a narcoleptic or had a problem with my brain or something. I explained what was happening to my doctor, and he was helpful, if not a little over-jovial. Kids your age shouldn't be having any sort of problems in that department, but we'll get you checked out, he assured me, with a smile and a pat on the shoulder. I was tested for every sleep disorder imaginable. I was given prescriptions of my own, but none of them seemed to work. I took supplements, signed up for new drugs that had just hit the market, and joined medical test groups. Despite all this, though, no one seemed to have any answer for what was going on. I was just so comfortable with my fiancée that I couldn't help but fall asleep in her arms. It would have been sweet if it wasn't worrying me to no end. We had decided on March for our wedding, the first anniversary of our meeting, and I was determined to make it special for her. I was as helpful and dutiful as a boyfriend/fiancé could be. I went with her to every stage of the planning. I picked out cake toppers, helped with seating charts, picked out menus, visited and put down a deposit on the venue, and comforted my soon-to-be wife every step of the way. The saving grace, of course, was that I could put my performance issues down as pre-wedding jitters as the day crept closer and closer. The wedding was easily the happiest day of my life. I stood at the altar, sweating in my rented tux, waiting for the moment she would arrive. The crowd huddled behind me in a murmuring throng of excited tension, and it felt like 1,000 years had passed before the music began from the organist. When I saw her in her dress, gliding down the aisle like a dream, I fell in love all over again. She was beautiful, her tears now ones of joy, and I never regretted asking her to join her life to mine. We exchanged rings, spoke vows of eternal love, and then walked from the church as husband and wife. As we stood for pictures, the venue having set up on the lawn to host our reception, I made ready to fulfill my end of tonight. I drank champagne for toasts and black coffee by the cup. I took caffeine supplements before we climbed into the car and left for our honeymoon suite. As she went into the bathroom to take her dress off, I walked around and tried my best to keep my heart racing. I told myself over and over again that tonight would be different, that tonight would repay for all the rest. I wanted nothing but to make her feel special and to make tonight one to remember. When she came out of the bathroom, the two of us standing before each other as husband and wife, I felt like I was possessed with all the energy and serenity I would ever need. When we woke up the next morning, intertwined as we always were, there were no tears on her cheek. Only a look of fulfillment I knew all too well. We settled into married life easily, and it was as though nothing had changed. Despite my best efforts, however, I couldn't recapture the magic of that night. Whenever I was in her arms, whenever we were close, I couldn't help but fall into that feeling of utter serenity and slip off to sleep. It was as if those feelings had multiplied after the wedding. She made me feel like I could die of happiness. I couldn't hold her hand as we drove anymore, lest I find myself listing off the road. If I cuddled on the couch with her to watch a movie, I would inevitably miss over half of it. I loved nothing more than to bask in that feeling of serenity that seemed to waft around her. But I also felt guilty as she seemed to return to her silent, tearful nature. I couldn't help myself. I was powerless to resist the pull of her, and I was powerless to do anything when I was in her arms. I began to notice as her mental health got worse, though. Kathy was moody and manic by turns. Sometimes she wanted nothing to do with me, only to cry and demand my attention. I often missed classes because I was afraid to leave her by herself, and I finally insisted that we go see a doctor. The doctor said this was normal. Her medication just needed to be adjusted. Despite their best efforts, though, the new pills and the adjustment of the old pills seemed to do no good. Our lovemaking was non-existent, despite my best efforts. I tried to comfort her, tried other means of intimacy, attended couples therapy with her, tried my best to keep her from imploding. In the end, though, it did no good. I remember the night it happened as vividly as I remember our wedding day. I was lying in bed, Kathy still in the bathroom, and I was worried about the appointment we had the next day. They planned to try her on a new battery of medications, and Kathy seemed to be willing to give it a try. She had wandered around the house like a fretful ghost all day, and I'd been keeping an eye on her until this very moment. I felt like if we could just get to bed, if we could just fall asleep in the comfortable embrace of each other's arms, everything would be fine. She climbed into bed, and something about her face didn't seem right to me. Then she opened her arms, and I was like a meteorite hurling into a planet's gravity. "I love you," she said, kissing my forehead as her heart raced against my chest. "I'll always love you." I fell asleep, wrapped in the arms of my love, sure that as long as I remained here, everything would be okay. I woke up, however, to discover that I was sleeping next to a corpse. I called the paramedics, but there was nothing they could do. She'd been dead for hours as I slept. Kathy had taken an overdose of sleeping pills before tucking in for the night. It was almost ironic in the end, and the note she had left on the nightstand told me everything I needed to know. All these years, I had believed that I was giving her the same feeling that she was giving me. It turned out I was nothing but a thief in the night. Kathy said that her mental decline had started almost the day we met. The balance and fulfillment that I had been expecting was a mirror to the anxiety that she was feeling. She had taken my inability to stay awake as something she was doing. She was boring me. I was disinterested. She was failing as a woman as a result. The longer it lasted, the more she felt like she was the cause. She wanted to please me, to be a good wife, but the longer it went on, the more inadequate she felt. She loved me. She never wavered in her love for me. But being with someone who was physically uninterested in her was killing her, physically and emotionally. She had finally decided that if sleeping next to her was what I wanted, then she would give me what I wanted. We would both sleep soundly for a change. I'm writing this as I sit in the viewing room of the funeral parlor. They gave me an hour before her cremation, a final viewing for her grieving husband. I could tell by the way they keep looking at me that I must look terrible. I've been awake for the past 5 days, and the bags under my eyes look more like suitcases. I've become accustomed to her presence, to the way she makes me feel, and now my sleep is all but non-existent. I'm like a junkie with no smack, and my fix lies in that box across the way, looking as lovely as the day we met. I think that when I get done with this, I may climb into that simple pine box with her and see if I can find some sleep. I can almost feel whatever she possesses from my seat here, and I want to see if she still possesses it, even in death. Who knows? Maybe I'll pull the lid closed behind me, and they'll simply slide me into the chute as well. It seems fitting somehow that the two of us should sleep forever, two souls at rest for all time. I heard he was a mute, and the clapping's how he communicates. I heard he's a ghost, and the clapping's how he gets your attention. I heard you're both big old babies who will believe in anything. Daryl and Gary looked up incredulously at me as I grinned back at them from across the lunch table. Oh yeah? Well, he's been linked to the disappearances of like 4 kids now, so sounds like a pretty good reason to be afraid to me, Daryl said, sounding mad. I just shrugged at him, popping a French fry into my mouth and savoring the salt. There's no proof that this clapping man is responsible for a candy bar going missing at Dell's, let alone Mike Frazier getting snatched. The clapping man story was something that had been circulating for a while. 3 young kids had gone missing first, all of them heading home from somewhere or another, and some of the witnesses had reported hearing a clapping sound before they had gone missing. One of them had even reported seeing a man shape in the woods before hearing the clap. They didn't have any details about the guy, but they said it looked like a person's shadow with long arms. Mickey had been the most recent disappearance, and the one that made the cops around Tiger the most nervous. The first 3 had been younger kids, elementary school students who hadn't looked like much, but Mickey had been a 17-year-old farm kid who was built like a linebacker. The story was that he was trying to find one of his dad's missing sheep around dusk and had just never come back. The stories were that he was near Kendall-covered bridge and that the sheep had been found dead underneath it the next day. There were the usual rumors that Mickey had run off or left with some girl, left with some boy for all they knew, but those of us who had known Mickey kinda doubted it. Mickey was slow. Not like special ed slow, but he was slower than average. He loved his family. He loved working on his parents' farm, and the thought that he would just run off when he couldn't come back with the sheep was laughable. Mickey liked football too, but if his dad had asked, he would have given it up in a heartbeat. The cops knew this too. That's why they were sure that Mickey had been taken by someone, and that someone had to be big. The bell rang then, but we kept our seats as the good little sheep dispersed around us. We'd leave when the monitor finally told us we had to, and not a minute before. Gary still looked a little nervous as the cafeteria cleared out, but Daryl was pretty used to it. Daryl and me had been hellions since we were young, but it was a life that Gary was slowly getting used to. I'm not a bad kid. Not really. I love my mama, I respect my daddy, and I keep my truck well maintained. I'm good to my girl, when I have one. That being said, I have no time for weakness or rules. The only rule I know is that the strong rule, and it's a rule that I learned from my daddy. If I'm strong, and I am strong, I should be able to do what I want. If other kids don't understand that, well, that's their problem. Just like when I push them down and show them who's boss. Daryl, Gary, and me never really considered ourselves a gang or nothing, but we pal around because we all believe that when you're strong, you're right. Miss Gladys looked our way, and I grinned at her and waved. Miss Gladys is cute, but she ain't strong. She teaches home ec, and she drives a Spark. Nothing about that says strong. She's come over before and tried to talk nice to us to get us back on the straight and narrow, but it never does any good. Eventually, she stopped trying, and when she turned to call Mr. Gersh, the shop teacher, we took to our feet and cleaned the table off, heading for class. Gersh was strong, an 8-year combat vet with scars to prove it, and he was not to be messed with. We were halfway to class when the bell rang for the start of 5th period, and I looked at the boys and told them I thought we should maybe take the rest of the day off. "I gotta get to math," Gary said. "If I don't keep at least a C, they'll kick me off the football team." "Same," Daryl said with a sigh. "If I don't pass history test today, my mama says I can't run the roads this weekend. Come on, man, just come to class with us. Beer'll still be there after school." I blew a big old raspberry at him and told them that if they wanted to be pansies, then I'll go drink it all up before they got there. They begged me not to go, but I was done for the day. School had never really held any appeal for me, and I'd already figured I'd drop at the end of the year and go on to hauling lumber like my uncle, or go to farming like my dad. I was too dumb for the army and too lazy for college, but at least I'd figured it out a year before anybody else. "Have fun in class, then," I said, waving as I walked to the parking lot to get my truck. The little Ford Ranger that Daddy had given me wasn't much, but it was fine for now. I really wanted one of those big old F-350s like my uncle had, but I'd either have to save up a bunch of money or steal one to have something that nice. The Ranger was fine, and I slunk out of the lot in low gear before turning and flying up the road for home. The dirt roads of Tiger were like a second home to me, and as I put the schoolhouse behind me, I thought again about just leaving on one of them for parts unknown. What was there really here for me? A dead-end job and a naggy wife, squalling kids and a mortgage I couldn't pay, a bottle of beer after work with the boys, a loveless marriage that would hang like a shackle around my neck, maybe a trip to Stragview if I wasn't careful, or a telephone pole in the night if I'd had a few too many beers. I didn't like to think too much about the future then, preferring to live in the moment, and just this particular moment was about to contain a 12-pack of beer. I pulled up behind the barn so Daddy wouldn't see me if he came home early. Daddy was at the farmer's market till around 4 selling his wares, and I figured he wouldn't be the wiser of me cutting school. I walked off into the field of peanuts, this year's crop, and on into the woods beyond. I'd been exploring the woods since I was potty trained, and the spot I knew of was about a mile back in the old tangle of trees. Daryl and me had found it when we were still small enough to squeeze between the roots of the snaky trees and make a clubhouse down there, and it now served as a spot for us to drink and smoke and bring girls to for some privacy. The forest was familiar, an old friend that had protected me sometimes when Daddy had a little too much to drink, and before I knew it, I could see the old growth of trees in the distance. Most of the forest was thick old oaks and scaggy little pulp trees, but the grove was different. It was old, felt ancient somehow, and being there made me feel peaceful, like nothing could hurt me while I was there. I got to the snaky trees and took a seat on the comfy old roots that stuck above ground, reaching into the gnarled old root system and pulling out a 12-pack of Budweiser. I cracked the first can and drank it quickly, smacking my lips as the crisp taste filled my stomach. This was the good life right here, but I knew it wouldn't last forever. I'd have to trade this kind of carefree time for adulthood soon enough, and the thought of saying goodbye to the snaky tree grove was a little sad. I opened a second one, drinking it slower this time, and as the wind rustled the leaves around me, I felt a yawn creeping up my throat. Daddy and me had been splitting wood before school today, and the early morning and the lukewarm beer was starting to make me groggy. As the second one disappeared and the third one popped open, I got comfy and watched the dragonflies and the little forest animals frolic in the boughs of the trees. I felt at ease, like I was floating, and when the beer can slipped out of my hand and fell into the nest of roots, I was snoring before it dumped its delicious contents on the ground. When I woke up, it was dark, and the sounds of birds and squirrels had been replaced with insects and the scamper of bats. This didn't immediately put me off. I'd been in the woods at night before. Daryl and me had camped out tons of times, and I'd even slept rough a time or two if Mama and Daddy were fighting. I pulled myself out of the tangle of roots and wobbled a little before getting my bearings. I wasn't drunk, not by a long shot, or hung over. I had taken a long nap in the woods, and now it was time to go home and face the music. The school would have called by now and told him I left early, and Daddy would be looking for me during evening chores and not finding me. These things would have culminated into him having a drink as he waited for me, so I was likely in for a bad time. I walked out of the grove, watching my step as I went, and that's when I first heard it. A loud pop sound that made me freeze in place and listen like a spooked deer. I stopped for a count of 5, waiting for it to come again so I could identify it, but all I heard was the quiet sound of the evening woods. I started walking again, but after 5 more steps, I heard the loud pop again. I thought it might be a tree branch cracking at first, but now it sounded more like something familiar. It wasn't a natural sound, not like a branch breaking or a rock bumping as it fell. This was a sound I hadn't really heard out here before. A sound I was familiar with, but seemed alien out here. Sounded like someone bringing their hands together for a single hard clap. Kept walking towards the house, thinking I was hearing things, but the longer I went, the more I heard the clapping sound. It was infrequent, always that one loud pop, and when I looked, there was nothing I could find that would have made it. The longer I walked, the more freaked out I got at the popping. I found myself looking for man shapes in the woods, thinking about what the kids had told the cops. It was big, like someone's shadow standing in the woods. Its arms were longer than usual, and they'd heard a loud clapping sound before their friend had disappeared. I stopped again. It had been closer this time. Sounded like it was about 20 feet away, and the clap had silenced many of the forest creatures that had been buzzing placidly. I wanted to run, but I made myself walk so I didn't trip in a hole or knock myself unconscious with a low-hanging branch. There was also the fact that these were my woods. Nothing bad could happen to me in my woods. No one could hurt me out here. No one would dare to... Now it was closer. 10 feet or better. It was following me, and I was still half a mile from home. I wondered how far it would let me get before it snatched me. Would they find any evidence that I'd been alive? Would they ever find anything? I quickened my pace. Holes be damned. I needed to go. I needed to get out of here. I needed to be behind my door with the lock thrown and the bolt pushed in. I'd hug my daddy and tell him I was sorry and take whatever punishment came, but I needed to know that the monster or freak or whatever was outside couldn't get me. I ducked a branch that I saw as a vague outline and kept moving. The popping had stopped for now, but I knew I wasn't safe. I had to get home. I had to get home. I had to get... I turned my head in the direction of the sound, and there it was. He was man-shaped, that was for sure. He looked like a bulky fella, his arms and legs just thick outlines in the murk. I couldn't see his eyes, but I could feel him on me. He didn't make a sound, but the longer I stayed still, the more I could hear a low murmur, like a TV show trying to break through the static. I thought he might be frozen by my stare, but as I watched, he raised his hands slowly and brought them together with a single loud clap. I took off like a shot. I ran and ran and ran as the poppin' followed me. I expected that every step would be my last. A claw would come out, or a set of teeth would clamp down on me, and I'd be dragged away to whatever served as a den for the digestion, or God knew what else. The popping sound started coming from directly behind me, and I could feel the air of those massive hands. I could see lights coming into view up ahead, and I thought I might have gotten turned around and found the highway. I didn't care. I just wanted someone to help me escape this creature, and I wasn't choosy about who. I broke through the tree line to discover that I had come out at the edge of my parents' farm, and the lights were flashlights as people looked for me. They were calling my name as they got closer to the woods, and I tore off towards the field in an attempt to stop them from entering. One of them could have just as easily been the thing's next meal, and I wasn't about to draw them to it. I found Daddy first, his beam turning to fix me, and he wrapped me in a hug as he recognized me. "God damn, boy, I was so scared you'd been took." He hugged me close, the first time I'd ever seen my daddy show that kind of emotion, and when he called out to them that he'd found me, I saw them all start heading to his location. The police came and talked to me, and I don't know if they took me seriously or not. They told people to stay out of the woods for a while and listen for a clapping if they were alone. McGhee was the last kid to go missing in Tiger that year, and when the clapping came back after that, they seemed better prepared for it. That experience changed me, and I'm glad to say that it was for the better. I started taking my schooling a little more seriously, stopped being so impetuous, started helping people instead of taking, and changed my way of thinking a lot. I still believe that strong people are important, but now I also believe that they have a responsibility to help those who aren't strong. I started volunteering to go out and woodland rescue, searching for people who'd gotten lost or looking for remains, and I got approached by the Park Service to see if I wanted to work with them. Now I help educate people so they don't get lost, and I find people who have gone missing. In a way, I guess I owe the clapping man a debt. He saved me that night from becoming a monster too, though I doubt it was his intention.